A businessman returns to his grandmother's diner, disguised as a regular customer, but inadvertently overhears his own employees mocking the very values on which the diner was built, forcing him to face the cracks and start rebuilding its soul from the ground up. How did he change everything? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're from around the world. Leave a comment below, we'd love to hear your story. Now, let's get into today's content together. Thomas Walker had always been a man of purpose, driven by the values his grandmother Maggie had instilled in him when she opened her diner decades ago. Maggie's diner wasn't just a place for food. It was a place for community, for second chances, and for people to feel like they mattered. But over the past year, Thomas had grown distant. The daily grind of meetings, dealing with suppliers, and managing the back end of the business had kept him away from the front lines of his own diner. He hadn't walked through that front door as a regular customer in what seemed like forever. The memories of laughter, warm hugs, and the smell of fresh cornbread had faded into a distant echo, a shadow of the place it used to be. Despite his best efforts, the soul of the diner seemed to be slipping away. Something didn't feel right. Rumors from the staff, anonymous reviews, and whispers from trusted friends had raised red flags. They said it was the small things, the missed smiles, the long wait times, the feeling that something was missing. But Thomas couldn't ignore the feeling in his gut. It was time to see for himself. So, on a crisp afternoon, he decided to dress down, hoping to blend in as just another customer. He put on his old jeans, a worn-out jacket, and pulled a baseball cap low over his brow. He hoped no one would recognize him. He needed to hear the truth, unfiltered. As he stepped out of his car and looked up at the familiar neon sign, the green and yellow glow felt almost foreign. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't there as the boss, but as just another person, waiting in line for a sandwich. The bustling sounds of the lunch rush filled his ears, the clatter of plates, the chatter of customers, but something felt off. There was a chill in the air, not from the weather, but from the lack of warmth in the atmosphere. No one greeted him. No smiles, no nods, nothing. He stood in line, feeling like an outsider in his own establishment. The familiar smells of slow-cooked brisket and cornbread didn't comfort him as they once did. Instead, they only reminded him of what had been lost. As Thomas waited in line, the reality of the situation began to settle in. It wasn't just the lack of recognition from the staff that unsettled him. It was the sense that the very essence of what Maggie's diner stood for had been lost. He had built this place from the ground up, pouring his heart and soul into every meal served and every customer who walked through the door. His grandmother, Maggie, had always said that food wasn't just nourishment. It was a way to connect people, to make them feel seen and heard. But standing there now, he felt invisible. The soft hum of the diner, once filled with the laughter of regulars and the chatter of families, seemed muted. The warmth he had so carefully cultivated in this place was replaced with an uncomfortable coldness. It was then that he noticed Sarah and Tim behind the counter, their casual demeanor starkly different from the energetic, friendly atmosphere he had once been proud of. Sarah, with her gum loudly popping in between orders, barely acknowledged him as he approached the counter. Her eyes were glued to her phone, her fingers scrolling mindlessly across the screen. Tim, standing next to her, seemed equally uninterested. He was tapping away on his own phone, barely glancing up as customers approached. It was as if they were only going through the motions, disconnected from the customers and the business they were part of. "Next," Sarah muttered, her voice lacking any enthusiasm or warmth. Thomas stepped forward, trying to remain calm despite the growing sense of disillusionment. "Can I get the pulled pork sandwich and a side of baked beans, please?" he asked, hoping for a spark of the old spirit, a sense of the diner's true nature. But Sarah didn't even look up. Her fingers tapped away on the register screen without a hint of engagement. "That it?" she asked flatly. Thomas could barely hear her over the loud gum snapping and the blaring country music playing from the speakers. He nodded, not sure what to say. As he handed her the cash, He wondered what had happened to the place he had once been so proud of. He stepped aside to wait for his food, but the sense of disappointment grew heavier. He could hear Sarah and Tim talking, and for the first time he wished he hadn't. "Did you see him?" Tim asked, smirking as he slipped his phone into his pocket. "Another one of those walk-ins from Main Street," Sarah replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "They never tip, you know. Not like the regulars. And ever since they started hiring from that shelter program or whatever, it's been downhill fast." The words hit Thomas like a punch to the stomach. He stood still, his heart heavy in his chest. They were talking about him, the man who had built this place from scratch, who had given people a chance when no one else would. He had hired people who had fallen on hard times, just like his grandmother had always done. Maggie's Diner had always been a place for second chances, for people to rebuild their lives. But now, it seemed that Sarah and Tim had forgotten that. They didn't understand the heart of the place, the soul of what it meant to give someone a chance. As the conversations continued, the mockery stung even more. "Yeah, the owner's some rich guy, probably off living the high life while we're stuck here doing everything," Sarah scoffed. "I bet he doesn't even know half the people he hired," Tim added with a chuckle. Thomas stood there, frozen in place. He should have been angry, and part of him was. But beneath that anger was something deeper, something colder. Disappointment. This place, Maggie's Diner, wasn't just a business. It was a legacy, a living tribute to the values his grandmother had held dear. And now, it seemed like the very soul of the diner had been eroded, piece by piece, by people who didn't care. He could feel the weight of it all, the years of hard work, the sacrifices made, now threatened by indifference and neglect. The warmth that had once filled these walls had been replaced by apathy. But as the conversation continued, Thomas made a silent vow to himself. He wasn't going to let it end like this. Maggie's Diner meant too much to him, to his grandmother's memory, to let it slip away. He would do whatever it took to bring back the heart of the place, even if it meant confronting the uncomfortable truth. As Thomas walked out of the diner, the weight of what he had just overheard pressed down on him. He hadn't even finished his meal, hadn't tasted the familiar flavors that had once been a source of comfort. He had stood there, listening to his own employees mock him, dismissing the very values that had shaped his life and the diner's legacy. But it wasn't just the words that stung. It was the realization that something had gone terribly wrong. He sat in his car, staring out the windshield, the rumble of the engine the only sound breaking the silence. The neon sign of Maggie's Diner glowed dimly in the distance, its light flickering like an old memory that couldn't quite find its place in the present. He thought about his grandmother, Maggie, who had poured so much love into this place. A woman who had always believed in the goodness of people, in second chances, and in the power of a warm meal to bring people together. When she opened the diner, it was never about profits or success. It was about community, about giving people a safe space where they could feel seen and valued. But as Thomas sat in the driver's seat, he realized how far he had drifted from that vision. The diner had become more of a business than a home for the people it served. He had become so focused on the numbers, the suppliers, and the logistics of running a successful operation that he had neglected the very spirit that made Maggie's Diner special. He hadn't walked through those doors as a regular customer in over a year. He hadn't taken the time to connect with his staff, to see how they were doing or to remind them of the purpose behind what they were doing. He had let the distance between himself and his employees grow, and now that distance was showing in the way they treated not just him, but the customers too. Thomas closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way he thought he would be. There was a sense of betrayal, sure, but more than that, there was a deep sense of disappointment. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. You can't plant a garden and forget to water it. And he had forgotten. He had let the garden wither, thinking the roots were strong enough to survive on their own. But now, he saw the truth. Without care, without attention, Everything he had worked for was slowly slipping away. It was time to change that, to be present again, to reconnect with the heart of Maggie's diner. He couldn't let it fade into nothingness. He would show up. He would fix what had been broken. And maybe, just maybe, he could bring back the soul of the place, one small step at a time. The next morning, Thomas decided to return to Maggie's diner. This time, he wasn't going in as the owner, not as the boss, but as someone who cared deeply about the diner's legacy. He knew he couldn't fix things from behind his desk or through meetings. He had to be present, to hear what was happening when he wasn't there. After a sleepless night filled with reflection, he drove to the diner early, arriving before the lunch rush began. He parked around the corner and walked quietly to the back alley, where there was a worn steel door used by the kitchen staff. He stood there for a moment, thinking about the countless times he'd stood in this very spot, feeling the warmth of the kitchen spilling out through the cracks of the door. But now, the air felt heavy. As he stood there, Thomas heard voices from inside. It was Reggie, the grill master, a man who had been with the diner for years. Reggie had a past, one that wasn't easy, but he had turned his life around. Thomas had hired him after a recommendation from a halfway house, and Reggie had proven to be more than just a hard-working employee. He had become a mentor to the younger staff. "Man, I'm telling you, he ain't never coming back," Reggie's deep voice boomed from inside. Thomas pressed his ear to the door, listening. "If he does, he'll probably walk in acting like he invented gumbo or something," Tim added with a laugh, his tone dismissive. Thomas felt his stomach churn. The words hit him hard, but it was what came next that made his heart stop. "Yeah, Mr. Ghost Boss," Sarah added. "He's got his picture on the wall, but he don't show his face." Thomas stood motionless, unable to move as the conversation continued. "What kind of boss runs a place like this?" Tim mocked. But then, Reggie's voice cut through the ridicule, calm yet firm. "Y'all know he started this place with nothing but a smoker and $200, right?" The others fell silent. "Yeah, so?" Sarah shot back, still skeptical. "So watch your mouth," Reggie replied, his voice laced with quiet authority. "This ain't just a job for some of us. Some of us remember what this place used to mean." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Thomas felt a lump rise in his throat. He had always known Reggie was loyal, but hearing him defend the very soul of Maggie's diner made him proud. At the same time, it deepened his sadness. The diner's heart, the very essence of what Maggie had built, was being lost, not because of a lack of work ethic, but because of a lack of connection. Reggie had tried to hold the line, but Sarah and Tim had drifted away from the spirit of the place. He knew right then that he had failed his grandmother's legacy, but he also knew that it wasn't too late to fix things. He had to show up, not just as a boss, but as someone who believed in the diner's purpose, as someone who cared enough to make it right. With that resolve, Thomas walked away from the alley and into the diner, determined to face the challenges ahead, one conversation at a time. The morning after hearing the painful words from his employees, Thomas walked into Maggie's diner with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew it was time to confront the truth head-on. He couldn't keep letting the disconnect between him and his staff fester, especially not when the very foundation of the diner was at risk. Thomas had always prided himself on his ability to listen, but this time he realized that it wasn't enough to just observe from a distance. He had to show up, to be present in a way that truly mattered. He had to make his presence felt in a way that wasn't about authority, but about connection. As he walked through the front door, he could feel the eyes of his staff on him. They were all gathered around the front booths, unsure of what was coming. Sarah and Tim looked up from their phones, their faces unreadable. Reggie, on the other hand, gave a small, knowing nod. Thomas could see the tension in the room, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Why had he come? The silence was thick, and for a moment it felt like everything had come to a standstill. Thomas took a deep breath, cleared his throat, and broke the silence. "I won't keep you long," he said, his voice calm but firm. But I need to say some things, and I want you to really hear me." His gaze swept over the room, taking in the faces of the staff, each one a part of the diner's heartbeat, for better or worse. "This place," he continued, his voice softening slightly, "it's named after my grandmother, Maggie. She passed away 15 years ago, but if you had ever met her, you'd understand why this place means more than just food or money. Maggie didn't run this diner for the reviews or the tips. She ran it because she believed in people. She believed in second chances, in giving folks who'd been overlooked a shot. And she believed in making people feel like they belonged." The room was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the kitchen in the back. Thomas paused, allowing the words to settle. He was opening up in a way he hadn't before, letting his staff see the heart of why he had built this place. "But yesterday, when I walked in," he continued, "I didn't recognize what this place had become. I came in, dressed down, ordered a sandwich, and stood right there." He pointed to the spot where he had stood the day before, where he had overheard the conversation. "And I heard you all talking about me, talking about how I don't care, how I'm too busy to show up, how the place is going downhill." His voice faltered for a moment, the weight of the words sinking in. "I didn't get angry. I walked out because I needed to understand what had happened, what had gone wrong." He looked directly at Sarah and Tim. "I'm not here to blame anyone, but the disrespect you showed, that's not acceptable. Not here." The room was still. Thomas could feel the tension in the air, but he also felt something else, a shift. It wasn't immediate, but it was there, like the first stirrings of a storm before the rain hit. "I'm not perfect," he added, "and I know I've been distant, but that ends today. From now on, I'm showing up. Not as the boss, but as someone who believes in this place, who believes in you." He looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. "You all have a choice to make. You can either commit to what this place means, to what we stand for, or you can walk away. But if you're here, I expect you to care. Not just about the paycheck, but about the people who walk through that door every day." The silence in the room was heavy, but it was different now. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence of people unsure of what to do. It was the kind of silence that comes before a turning point, before something shifts. Thomas knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew it was the only way to get Maggie's diner back to what it had once been. It was time to start the work. It was time to listen, to lead, and most importantly, to show up. The following morning, Thomas arrived at Maggie's diner earlier than usual, a sense of anticipation swirling in his chest. He had given his staff a choice the day before: stay and commit to the values that had built this place, or walk away. It was a hard decision, but it was necessary. He couldn't afford to let the apathy and disrespect that had seeped into the diner continue unchecked. He had to make it clear that Maggie's diner wasn't just a place to clock in and out. It was a place of purpose. As the staff trickled in one by one, Thomas watched them closely. Reggie, as always, was the first to arrive. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the weight of this place. He unlocked the back door, gave Thomas a silent nod, and went straight to the kitchen to get started. Reggie had always been the backbone of the diner, the steady presence that held everything together when things felt shaky. After Reggie, the others began to filter in. Sarah arrived next, her eyes glued to her phone, a slight frown on her face as she walked in late, just like she always did. Tim came in shortly after, earbuds in, laughing at something on his phone, clearly not focused on the task at hand. Thomas observed them quietly, noticing the same careless attitudes he'd seen before. It was clear that Sarah and Tim had not taken his words to heart. Not yet. They were still treating this place like it was just a job, like it was just a place to collect a paycheck. But as they all gathered in the front of the diner, Thomas knew it was time for them to make a decision. He had laid the groundwork yesterday, but now it was time to see who was willing to step up. "Morning," Thomas said, his voice firm but calm as he stepped into the room. "You all know why we're here. Yesterday I gave you a choice. I said you could either commit to what this place stands for or walk away. Now it's time to show me where you stand." There was a slight pause, a moment of hesitation. Thomas could see the uncertainty on their faces, but he wasn't backing down. This was about more than just fixing a broken system. This was about restoring the spirit of Maggie's diner, the heart and soul that had been lost over time. "I'm not here to tell you how to do your jobs," he continued, looking each person in the eye. "I'm here to tell you that if you're going to be part of this team, if you're going to be a part of what we're building here, you have to care. About the customers, about the food, about each other. Because without that care, none of this works, none of it." Sarah shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Tim fidgeted, his arms crossed defensively, but Reggie, standing in the back of the room, gave a small nod. Thomas turned to him, his voice softening. "Reggie, you've been here from the start. You know what this place means. I need you to help lead the way. We can't do this without you." Reggie met his gaze and gave a simple but resolute answer. "I'm in. Always have been." The words, quiet as they were, carried more weight than anything else Thomas had heard all day. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. It was a sign that someone still believed in what this place could be. As Thomas looked around the room, he saw a mix of expressions, some uncertain, some defensive, but none outright hostile. It was a start. "The rest of you," Thomas continued, "you have until the end of today to decide. If you're here, I expect you to give it your all. If not, then you're free to walk. No hard feelings, but don't waste anyone's time pretending." The room was still for a moment longer, and then, slowly, the team began to disperse. Thomas watched them closely, but his eyes kept drifting back to Reggie. He knew that if anyone was going to help restore Maggie's diner, it would be him. Reggie was the heart of this place, and Thomas was determined to bring that heart back to life. The next few days at Maggie's diner felt like a delicate balance between change and uncertainty. Thomas kept his word. He showed up, not just physically but mentally, committed to being present, to leading by example, and to making sure the heart of the diner was alive and well. He spent hours walking the floors, talking to customers, and, most importantly, engaging with his staff. The shift was subtle at first. Sarah, who had been aloof and distracted, started to smile more, though it was awkward at first, like someone wearing shoes that didn't quite fit. Tim, who had always seemed indifferent, began to show more effort, though it was clear he was still grappling with the idea of genuinely caring about the place. But there was something different in the air, a quiet energy that hadn't been there before. Reggie, as always, was the steady hand guiding the ship. He was the first to step up when a new hire, Isaiah, nervously walked in one morning for his first shift. Isaiah had come from a local shelter program, looking to turn his life around, and though he was shy and unsure, Reggie made him feel welcome. "You got this, man," Reggie said with a quiet nod as Isaiah hesitantly approached the counter. Isaiah smiled, grateful for the encouragement, though it was clear he still didn't quite believe in himself. Watching from the back, Thomas felt a small flicker of hope. This was the spirit of Maggie's diner that had been missing. The spirit of lifting each other up, of creating a community where people mattered. The real test came during the lunch rush. As the line of customers began to grow longer, the energy in the diner shifted. People moved faster, but it wasn't frantic. There was a rhythm now, a sense of purpose. Sarah was still a bit rough around the edges, but she was trying, greeting customers with a real smile instead of just going through the motions. Tim was more focused than he had been in days, actually paying attention to the orders and making an effort to engage with the regulars. Thomas stood near the coffee station, watching the flow of the diner, taking mental notes. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of hesitation, moments where it was clear they weren't fully comfortable with the changes. But it was better. The lunch crowd had come and gone, and when the final customer left, the staff remained behind, still buzzing with energy. Thomas made his way to the counter, where Sarah and Tim were wiping down the surface. "You did well today," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "I can see you're trying, and that means a lot." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes a bit wider than usual, a genuine thank you written on her face. Tim just nodded, his face still a little guarded but less defensive. Then Thomas turned to Reggie, who was silently overseeing the aftermath of the rush. "Reggie," Thomas began, "you've been the backbone of this place. Thank you for staying steady, for showing up every day. I wouldn't be able to do this without you." Reggie's response was simple, a slight nod, but it meant more than words could express. It was a shared understanding between them, an unspoken promise that this diner, this place Maggie had started, was worth saving. And though it would take time, Thomas knew they were on the right path. The spirit of Maggie's diner was starting to return. It was slow, imperfect, but it was real. And that, Thomas realized, was enough.